Okay, so for the next unit of study, we're going to be looking at Europe and Central Asia. And so we're going to be looking at Islamic arts. And so just like when we started looking at Christian art, we're going to have to learn a little bit about the fundamentals of the religion in order to understand why the sacred spaces were created, why they look the way that they do, and how they're used by the people who practice the religion. So we're going to be looking at those characteristics today and how they relate to religious beliefs. So like what we did with Christianity, you might not have a lot of space in your note takers to add all of this stuff. Some of it could go into context, but if you have an additional notebook, or you can open up a Google Doc and on your Chromebooks, feel free to go ahead and do that. But like I said, we're going to be focusing mostly on Islam in Europe as well as Asia. You can see that it did expand into Africa, and we will look at a mosque when we look at Africa as well, but we only have one image in Africa for Islamic art. So just some basic fundamentals of the religion. Islam began with the Prophet Muhammad, and the word Islam means surrender, which is a central idea to the faith, that you should be surrendering to the will of God or Allah, right? And then just kind of a little bit of background, Islam, Judaism, as well as Christianity have many of the same holy sites, such as Jerusalem. And they also share a lot of prophets that are the same. So people like Abraham. We often call these three religions our Abrahamic Faiths because they all believed in Abraham and his family, and they played vital roles in the formation of those religions. There are a lot of similarities in people in kind of the study of these different faiths, especially in the Old Testament. So Adam and Noah and Abraham and Moses, and even in the New Testament, the concept of Jesus. Now, Jesus isn't necessarily a prophet, but he was a teacher. And so he is recognized in Judaism, as well as his mother Mary. Not Judaism, Islam, excuse me. There is a general article that you might want to look at if you want to have some more background information on Islam on Khan Academy. So we have of the Holy Book. Let me go ahead and close the door. So just like when we talked about Christianity, we did some focus on the Bible. And one of the main reasons of that is because a lot of the imagery that we'll see is based on, books in the Bible. So just like in Islam, we'll have some images that are in Qurans or come from Quran. So the Quran is the holy book of Islam. It basically means recitation, and they're revelations from God. So revelations from Allah. Muhammad had these divine recitations in the form of the Quran, and they're organized in different books, just very similar to what we saw in the Bible. So surahs, and then we have verses. And these things were revealed by God to the Prophet Muhammad through the Archangel Gabriel. And it took approximately about 23 years for him to get all of these teachings and recitations from God. When we think about the Quran, it's considered to be the largest or the most important miracle that happened to Muhammad in his lifetime. And this proved his proof of his prophethood and basically him revealing messages. The messages started with being revealed to Abraham and ended with Muhammad. In the Quran, there is not a lot of stories about the life of Muhammad. Unlike in the New Testament, when we think about Jesus, a lot of that stuff is passed down in other literature and teachings of the religion. The official language of the Quran is Arabic, and so many people learn Arabic in order to read the Quran, but just like any other teaching book, it has been translated into numerous languages, so it's not necessary today. But former teaching, a lot of people would learn Arabic in order to understand it. So basics of the life of Muhammad. He was born in 570. So you can see that he was born during the time of the Romans, and his early life was considered to be rather unremarkable. He married a widow who was 15 years older than him and his employer. And then around 610, he had his first religious experience where he was instructed by the archangel Gabriel. And after a period of introspection and self-doubt, he basically accepted the role as God's prophet. So he didn't really believe it at first. The archangel came to him and told him he was the prophet, and it took a little while for him to be convinced that that was so. Sorry, want to make sure I get all of this in. Islam is monotheistic, so there is only one central God, and that was one of Muhammad's core teachings. And then what happened is, he's preaching, and he gets run out of the city of Mecca. And if you know anything about Islam, you know that Mecca is considered the most holy site in the Islamic world. And so he was run out of that city, goes to another city called Medina, and built the Muslim community there. And then he was strong enough to come back and retake Mecca. So when he came back to Mecca, he had a purge at the Kaaba. So we'll talk about the Kaaba today. The Kaaba was a structure that supposedly comes from the time of Abraham, and it would have had pagan images, it would have had different idols, and so basically he threw out those images and reclaimed it for Allah. And so there they built a shrine to that. So the Kaaba is believed to have been built by Abraham that I saw, or Abraham, and his son Ishmael. And so we kind of know those names from the New Testament as well, or excuse me, the Old Testament as well, if you practice Christianity. And so this site would have been an important pilgrimage site. And then Muhammad died in Medina in 632. And so in the tradition of Islam, he was considered to be the final in the line of the great prophets. So the other great prophets would have been Moses and Abraham as well. Okay, so after the death of Muhammad, the territories or the religion was basically divided up into four. And so these were called the Caliphs. And so some of the Caliphs that kind of broke apart from this actually show some of the fractions in the religion that we still hear about today. Not as much as when, maybe 20 years ago, but you hear the word Shia and Shiite, and some of these come from the different followers of these four religious rulers. Okay, so let's learn a little bit about the basic foundations and basic beliefs of the religion. Does anyone know what the 5 pillars of Islam are? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, tell me one. Right, and that will be important because we'll look at an image from it today. So you take a pilgrimage. What else? Yeah, so there's prayer, and you do it 5 times a day. Yep. Isn't there acts of charity? Acts of charity, yep. Okay, so here's your list for you. And the reason to know this is that, like I mentioned, some of these structures that we're going to see are in direct correlation to these 5 pillars. So you have to proclaim only one God, and that Muhammad was God's messenger. You have to have prayer, and that's performed 5 times a day. And what you do is you face Mecca in order to pray. So that relates to an image that we'll see today. We have annual taxations and giving to charity, so that's almsgiving. Fasting during the time of Ramadan. And then if you're physical and financially able, you should take at least one pilgrimage in your life to Mecca. So those are the 5 pillars of Islam. So if you didn't get all of that done, if you focus on one God and Muhammad messenger, prayer, almsgiving, fasting, and then the Hajj would be the important key elements. Okay, so that leads us to our image for today, 183, the Kaaba. How does it relate to the 5 pillars? How does it relate to the 5 pillars? The hard talking days with so few of us here. Anyone know? Yeah. Right, it's where you take the Hajj, okay? So it is the place that you actually point yourself towards when you are praying 5 times a day. You're facing Mecca, but more importantly, you're facing the Kaaba, right? So you pray towards it. When you're in, if you are physically and financially able, you take your pilgrimage there, right? So the Hajj is the name of the pilgrimage, right? Oh, look it was animated. Okay. So in this contextual image, you can see that there are people basically circled around in rows, and they are all leaning forward and pointing towards the Kaaba, right? So they are all bent over in prayer. Okay, so it is encased in an incredibly large mosque in Mecca. Mecca is considered the mother of the cities, and this is where Muhammad was from and brought back the religion once he was run away from it. And so you can see that this courtyard, it's basically been expanded for centuries. It's always been a rather large mosque, but it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's been remodeled several times. It's been flooded. Actually, a few years ago, it was caught on fire. So it has been changed and altered. But when you look at it, you can see, hopefully you can see all of these people, right? Like, look, notice how covered it is with people on the roof, as well as in the atrium space around the Kaaba there. So that's a detailed image of it. Okay. So why do people go to Mecca and go to the Kaaba? Like, what do they do when they're there? What they do is they circumambulate. Circumambulate is basically where you walk around it again and again. And what you do is you walk around it at least 7 times. So that's a ritual that people perform when they go there. When they circle around it, they want to kind of come up close to it and touch the black stone. There's a black stone on the corner here that's connected to an altar that Adam and Eve made. We have a lot of garden imagery in Islamic art, and that's connected to paradise of Adam and Eve. The black stone was supposedly given by Abraham by the archangel Gabriel. And they cover this structure. So the Kaaba itself is a structure that supposedly dates back to the time of Abraham. And it was basically covered in this black shroud. So this cloth that we have around it, it covers it up. They replace it every year, so they refresh it. And it's very simple in its design. You can see where it's black, and then it has a band, and then it has another band with kind of like this hanging component. It's in gold, and all of that is written in calligraphy. So we have Arabic inscriptions all around it with basic teachings, like the fundamental core beliefs of the religion. So it's not a very large structure. People don't go inside it, right? They really just go around it. Okay, so the Kaaba was cleaned out by Abraham, or excuse me, by Muhammad. Like I said, it comes from the time of Abraham, but it held a lot of idols that went kind of against the religion. And so once he actually went there, he cleaned it out. Let's go ahead. I'm going to pause the video for this, and we're going to just watch a short video from National Geographic. It will review some of the information that I just mentioned. One of the things that you might have noticed from that video is that people are wearing very similar clothing. And so when you go on the Hajj, one of the key elements is that everyone kind of looks the same, or at least unified by their religion. That no matter what your income level is, no matter where you live in the world, you're all united by the faith. And so they often wear very similar clothing. Some of it hides their wealth so that you can't tell who's the uber wealthy and who is like maybe more the middle class, and so on. And so that's a part of that fundamental part of the belief that if you're financially able in your lifetime, you should go at least once. So just a little bit structurally, it's made out of masonry, the fabric, and the gold and silver thread. And that gold and silver thread, just like what we saw with like a Byzantine church, you know, it makes it seem powerful, it makes it seem holy, it really emphasizes the importance of it. Okay, so questions on the Kaaba? Feel free to obviously look at the Smart History article as well. So the theme for Islam is COG, and so it's the word cog. So like gears, it's unity in multiplicity. So kind of unified in numerous shapes and sizes. Okay, so gears and cogs, they kind of represent this idea of working together and united by a faith. And in Islamic art, there is an avoidance of figurative imagery. So like we mentioned with like the iconoclastic controversy and Byzantine art, that there's an intentional avoidance of figurative imagery. So there's like a lack of people, and even sometimes like animals, anything that kind of looks like it's like living with like a heartbeat is often not included in religious art. That doesn't mean we won't see people. We just will see people in secular books that are made by Muslims. So just keep that in mind that this is normally just about religious artworks. Muhammad preached against idolatry, and in some of the teachings said that only Allah could create life, and that's why that belief is often adhered to, but that doesn't actually mean that that's what it meant. And so there actually are different groups that believe that it is okay to have figurative imagery. The imagery that we will see in our images for the 250 are based on calligraphy. So the C in COG stands for calligraphy. Calligraphy is often considered the highest form of artwork, or the highest form of art. It's written to create the word of God. So it's used to write the Quran, but it's also used for inscriptions and decoration. So we'll see it on surfaces of a mosque. We'll see it used in decoration, like on the Kaaba. All that gold and silver thread that we saw as it wraps around had calligraphy written across it. The O stands for organic. In Islamic art, we call it Arabesque. Arabesque is vegetation, like details based on vegetation. So details based on plant life. Okay, so we have calligraphy, then we have organic or Arabesque imagery, and then the last one is geometry. So we have a lot of geometric patterns. Decoration is kind of broken up into complex geometric arrangements, and it's based on mathematics. concept of unity and multiplicity actually comes from an old textbook that we had for this class. And it's this basic belief that people are unified in a common religion, excluding kind of like their background. We also see it represented in artworks visually, because often we have surfaces that are covered with detail. And this idea of repetition and unity, we'll see in just a second. So here we can see calligraphy, right? So this, for the most part, is on architecture. So in the tiles that cover a building, notice within this frame, the black is calligraphy. This is a border on an architectural framework. That in white is calligraphy. This tile that's in a circular pattern radiates out, and that is calligraphy. So it's used to decorate, right? And then the organic or the arabesque, we see it in tons of places as well. This is the Arabesque carpet that we'll talk about. You can see that in the kind of surrounding area, we have a lot of vines and scrolls and flowers. We see in the tiles that cover surfaces, we see the abstracted sort of vegetation. We'll see carvings and stucco of natural objects, flowers, other things as well. So it's not just a surface that you'd see in tile work, you'd see it in carpets and architectural decoration. And then geometry is how we kind of put it all together. So the arabesque and the calligraphy are normally in frames or kind of held into these geometric patterns. And we see kind of this really complex system that's all derived from mathematics. Kind of work like tessellation with interlocking patterns. You guys might remember tessellations from like mathematics in elementary school, or the artwork of MC Escher. Okay, this is an example of the infinite arabesque. So this is a word that's used when we see artworks that are literally covered, just covered. It's almost like it's been wallpapered in like arabesque, but also calligraphy in geometric patterns. It's kind of like the culmination of all of it together, right? So you see that every surface is covered with this use of COG. And then that's kind of goes with this idea that COG isn't necessarily representing images of people. So like we had in like the interior of a church, we had like stories from the Bible. You don't necessarily see that on a mouse. Okay, so we're gonna move to our second site for today. And our site, the Dome of the Rock, is on Haram al-Sharif in Jerusalem. Does anyone know why this site is so important in the city of Jerusalem? Does anyone know what Haram al-Sharif is known for? It is an important site for almost all of those monotheistic religions that come from Abraham. So to Judaism, it was the site of the second Jewish temple, the one that Titus destroyed when we saw in the Arch of Titus, right? So this was the place of the Jewish temple. It was also the site of a Roman temple because, of course, when Titus was there and he conquered, they transformed it and put which number is it? Yeah, this is Dome of the Rock, 185. Sorry about that. So 185. So it's the site of a Roman temple for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. There's a rock on this mount that was associated with the creation of Adam. It also is a rock where Abraham was going to sacrifice his son Isaac, or in Islam, we say Ishmael. So God told Abraham to sacrifice his one and only son, right? And of course, in Christianity, that's a precursor, an allusion to God giving Jesus for the sin of man. And then in Islam, just by itself, because it's also associated with Adam and Abraham, it's the place where Muhammad ascended into heaven. in the night journey in the 17th surah. So the 17th book in the Quran, there's a story about how Muhammad goes up into heaven from this rock, and he basically gets to meet a bunch of prophets that came before him. Okay, so this structure was built during the Umayyad dynasty. And so, like I mentioned, after the death of Muhammad, there was a series of civil wars where it was broken up into these different caliphs. And there was the Umayyad dynasty that emerged from the war, and they did not have the territories of Mecca. They were kind of pushed out, and they went into what we consider to be modern day Syria today. So they had their stronghold in Damascus, and they could not conquer Mecca, and so they needed to find another important site in Islam, and so they went to Jerusalem. So the Umayyads are the ones who built the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, but they also built the Great Mosque in Damascus. It is not in the 250, but we will see it as I show you different examples of different kinds of mosques. Okay, so here is the Dome of the Rock. Does anyone know what the functions of the Dome of the Rock are? What the functions of it are? Okay, it is not a mosque. So I want to make sure that we understand it. It is a building, but it is not a mosque. The Kaaba is in a mosque, but it too is not a mosque itself. So the functions of the Dome of the Rock is it commemorates and marks the spot of that of the 17th surah where Muhammad goes up into heaven. There he met Moses, Christ, as well as other prophets. So I shouldn't say Christ, I should say Jesus there. I apologize. Okay. The structure itself protects the sacred route, excuse me, the sacred rock. So it protects that rock that Muhammad ascended from. It was built by Abd al-Malik, and so he was this Umayyad caliph who was trying to exert his power. And because he could not conquer Mecca, he wanted to make sure he went to another important site. And so he built this holy shrine to exert his power, but also to compete with Christian churches that were developing in the city of Jerusalem as well. So like the Church of the Nativity was being built at the very same time the Dome of the Rock was being built. It's basically a tribute to the triumph of Islam. It kind of marks the coming of this new faith and this new religion in a city that was developing Christianity at the same time, but it also had been a stronghold of the Jews. So it was really trying to be a beacon for Islam. Basically, show the promise of this new faith, because if you go back to the date, right? This is a really, I only have the date on here. It's an incredibly early structure, right? And Islam definitely took off, I would say, even faster than Christianity did in this part of the world. It took centuries for churches to be built, but it took decades for mosques to be built or holy shrines, right? So when we look at the structure itself, this is being done in the same time some of these early Christian and Byzantine churches were being made. Is there any parts of this that seem similar to Roman or Byzantine architecture that we've already discussed? Go ahead and chit chat with each other. What are some similarities that you see? Okay, feel free to chit chat if you want. What do you think? What's Byzantine or Roman-esque about it? I shouldn't say Romanesque, that's another art form we'll talk about later, but Roman-like. What do you think? Yeah. Mhm. It's got marble, right? And so it's got kind of like the similar to a marble work that we saw at the Parthenon or the Pantheon, as well as like San Vitale, right? Where we saw the marble work there too. We've got the dome. It had Byzantine artisans. Now it has been remodeled, especially during the time of Suleiman the Magnificent of the Ottoman Empire. But it was probably very similar in its opulence before it was redone. We think, or we know, I should say, that the original artisans were the same people who created a lot of Byzantine architecture, so and decoration. So it would have been the same sort of artisan. There are arches. Can you see how the entrance is an arch, and these niches are in arches as well? It's covered in mosaic, and of course we have the gold dome. This is all redone, but in its own day, it would have had very similar sort of features when it was originally created. So here is the interior of it. How's the interior similar to San Vitale? How's the decoration similar? What's it made out of? What's the decoration of the interior made out of? Yeah. Right, we have mosaics and we got mosaic tiles, we got tesserae, we got the use of gold, right? Look at the colonnade on the outside, it's full of, it's an arcade, right? It's got an ambulatory that walks around the entire thing. So underneath that dome, it's covered in this beautiful tile work. So here you can see on the exterior and the interior, covered with all of this patterning. We have repetition. We have this beautiful marble work. This is above one of those columns. You can see that it has these really beautiful tiles, kind of like vases here with ornate patterns on them, or arabesque in the details, where it's kind of like these rosettes as it moves around. So this too would shimmer, right? Shimmer with the lighting. So it's not a mosque. It protects the rock in the center. So when we look at the plan of it, we can see that it's a central plan, right? It's a central plan design. It has a dome over that rock that Muhammad ascended from. And how it's used is that you too circumambulate this. So just like at the Kaaba where you walk around it, you do the same thing here. You walk around the ambulatory. The ambulatory is the side aisles that circle the rock, and you walk around it several times reading the inscription. So on the surface of the walls, right? Can you guys see up here? See the calligraphy in the bands? There you're able to read the inscription. And so it's all taken from the Quran. They're important like lessons that come from the faith and relate to the ascension into heaven. Okay, that is all we have for today. I did have another video that I kind of skipped over in case we ran out of time. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then we will look at, let me go back to the right slide that has it. So that if people at home want to watch the video, they can. So it's on this first slide here.